Welcome to this episode of Life Science Success. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Don and I'm a digital marketer. And before we get into today's episode, I just wanted to play a quick message from our sponsor.
Episode of Life Science Success is brought to you by D3 Digital Media Marketing. Dive into the digital world with confidence and creativity on your side. D3 Digital Media Marketing is your all-in-one solution for making a lasting impact online. From the vibrant, engaging world of social media marketing, podcasts, and webinars to the strategic depths of website development, SEO, pay-per-click, email, and content marketing, we tailor our approach to fit your unique brand story. Let's elevate your presence, connect with your audience, and drive success together. Your digital journey starts here. Visit d3digitalmedia.com to learn more.
In this episode of Life Science Success, we dive deep with Dr. John LaMattina, former president of Pfizer Global R&D, current biotech industry leader from groundbreaking drug discoveries to shaping the future of pharmaceuticals. Dr. LaMattina is going to share with us his journey from the lab to the boardroom. So welcome.
Oh, thanks, Don. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, it's great to have you on. I really appreciate it. And can you just maybe just take a little bit of time and tell us a little bit about your journey from being a medicinal chemist to becoming the president of Pfizer Global R&D?
Well, I'll try condense 30 years into 1 minute or so. As you mentioned, I'm trained as a chemist. I came to the Pfizer research labs in Groton, Connecticut back in 1977. And I started as a bench scientist, as a medicinal chemist. And about every 3 years or so, I was fortunate enough to get a promotion and have my job grow. And I'll highlight the biggest ones. I guess in the late 90s, I became the head of discovery research in Groton, which was a bit of a challenge and a thrill because I was responsible for all the projects going from idea through to getting a compound into development. Then, though, in 1999, I was given a different position. I was put in charge of all development, which was basically the clinical research and all the drug development aspect, which was a big stretch, but it might have been some of the most rewarding experiences I had, getting exposed to another side of the business. And then a few years later, based on my discovery and development experience, Pfizer put me in charge of global R&D, which at the time was pretty big. This was before Pfizer condensed R&D operations quite a bit, but we had labs in those days running from the United States, Connecticut, Michigan, St. Louis, through London, England and France, and through to Japan. So the sun never set on Pfizer R&D in those days. So it was a great job, very rewarding. I got to work with some tremendous scientists. And when we were successful and we actually got a drug approved, it was a wonderful experience.
Yeah, I'll bet. I could only imagine, throughout all of that time, that there had to have been, some great challenges as well that were probably learning experiences also. Could you tell us about, anything that was significant that you felt that you took away from the experience that you had at Pfizer?
Well, I'll give you a negative example, but one that was unfortunately left a real big impression. That was a compound called torcetrapib. We were really leaders in cardiovascular research at the time. We had Lipitor, which was at the time the biggest selling drug in the industry. And we were then looking for the next improvement in cardiovascular health. And at the time, it was believed that if you raised so-called good cholesterol, HDL, that you would have a more profound influence on reducing heart attacks and strokes. And we developed a compound which became torcetrapib, which worked wonderfully. In fact, other companies started chasing us. And we started and the compound was terrific. When we combined it with Lipitor, you had a complete remodeling of somebody's lipoprotein profile. I don't know how well the audience knows what their lipids should be, but basically you ended up having far more good cholesterol than bad cholesterol. The LDL numbers were down in the 70s or 80s, and the HDL numbers were on the order of 100. And we launched a major billion-dollar clinical trial, because the FDA wasn't going to approve this just based on raising good cholesterol. They want to say, okay, this is what happens, but what is the actual benefit to patients? And it turned out that the compound didn't work. That despite the raising of good cholesterol, you had no real impact, beneficial impact on reducing heart attacks and strokes. And so we had to end the program. And it taught me a few things. Number one, just because you have an interesting biochemical effect doesn't mean to say you're going to have a beneficial effect medically. And it also taught you that no matter how good things look tremendous in phase two. The compound looked pretty safe. You never know what's going to happen, and you're not. The old Yogi Berra saying, "It's not over till it's over. It's not over until the FDA approves your drug." So that had an impact on me, and points of portfolio balancing and things like that. So it's not a positive story, but one that made a pretty big impression on me, and also at our company.
Yeah, I would could only imagine so, and I also think though too that out of all of the times that I've asked a similar question, oftentimes people tell very closely positive stories, right? And learnings from it. So I mean, oftentimes we do learn a lot from when things don't go right, and so thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it.
And let me make one more addition, and that is that unfortunately, we spent a lot of money and a decade of research showing to the world that raising good cholesterol, the so-called good cholesterol, didn't really impact heart disease. So this had a major impact on how to treat heart disease and lipid abnormalities. And it's something that people don't appreciate. That the major thing I think that the drug industry does, that the biopharm industry does, is it proves or disproves medical hypotheses. In this case, we disproved the hypothesis that raising good cholesterol would be beneficial. It was a costly experiment, I would say, but nevertheless, it was important. And the industry never really gets credit for things like that. And the same thing happened, I'll digress for a second, with the mRNA vaccines. Before Pfizer and Moderna came up with life-saving and pandemic relieving mRNA vaccines, nobody knew if an mRNA had any therapeutic uses at all. And it took, unfortunately, a pandemic, but also two companies investing a lot of time and money into coming up with something that ended up saving the world. So before that, mRNA was sort of not quite a curiosity, but people weren't sure what it'd be good for. And again, the industry stepped up, and in doing so, that's a positive case, and in doing so, saved the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank goodness for all of the groundbreaking, research, but also all of the work it seemed like that we had done beforehand in Africa and other places seemed to have a definite positive effect overall in where we wound up as well. So yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. I mean, it's a great lead in for my next question, which really is, how's your experience, with big pharma? Helped you, with the biotech companies that you worked on since leaving Pfizer?
So I've worked with a number of biotech companies since that time, and it's been very rewarding in a number of ways. Number one, I have a pretty 30 years of experience in discovery and development, and so there are a lot of learnings I could share as a board member or scientific advisor to these smaller companies, and I think that experience is valued, uh, and also I can advise people on where regulatory agencies might how they might look at programs and what kind of pitfalls you can have. So from that point of view, I think I can contribute a lot, and I do contribute a lot to their efforts and going forward. For me, it has kept me really on the cutting edge of science because a lot of these companies are doing things that are on the edge of what a big pharma would do. I'll give one example. I'm with Pure Tech Health, and we started a program in the microbiome space. And the theory being that the microbiome irregularities could be the foundation and cause of a variety of diseases. And at the time, if I was working at Pfizer in those days, we wouldn't have started a microbiome company because it would have been too speculative. Where's it going to go? What therapeutic area would we use it for, et cetera? But a company like Vedanta, which is still private, but now has compounds in phase 2 and phase 3, they could have, with venture capital investment, which is always very important, can do that kind of cutting edge speculative research that a big company wouldn't do. Not that a big company doesn't care about that, but rather they have other priorities and other things. And at a place like Pfizer, we would wait to see if any thing came out of the microbiome, and then would invest in those companies. So it's been very rewarding for me to keep on cutting edge of science, to work with really bright young scientists who put up with sort of an old guy like me, and it's a lot of fun to keep engaged and to try and help things.
Yeah, I think it's funny that you say that, because I'm in a similar category. I feel like there are a lot of people that I work with that, sort of, listen to the lessons that I've learned throughout time, and they're like, look, that's not going to happen here. And next thing you know, the signs start showing that, hey, look, we're following the same exact path that's going to lead us to the end result that I've seen before. And so, yeah, it is,
Yep,
it
exactly right.
is interesting to be the grumpy guy in the room.
I fit that profile well.
Yeah, me too. Me too. So I guess, can you explain a little bit? And I feel like you just touched on it somewhat, but could you explain a little bit about PureTech Health's approach to developing new classes of medicine and how it differs from traditional pharmaceutical research?
Sure. So PureTech itself is a relatively small operation. You only have about 60 or 70 full-time employees. What PureTech does beautifully, I'm going to use a specific example, is to come up with ideas that are unique to go after important diseases. So probably about 11 years ago, 12 years ago or so, a couple of people at PureTech, Eric Alenko and Andrew Miller, were looking for new ways to treat schizophrenia. And they ran across an old compound from Eli Lilly, which had done pretty well. It was a muscarinic agonist, and had done pretty well in terms of treating schizophrenia, but it was plagued by muscarinic side effects. And so they dropped the compound. Eric and Andrew, what they thought was, well, there are anti-muscarinics out there that act peripherally. Maybe we can develop a combination drug that would maintain the anti-schizophrenic activity of the Lilly compound, but yet downplay the muscarinic GI and other effects. So I went to Lilly, got a license to the compound. We then virtually got formulations, got material made, got formulations, and again ran the clinical studies, and it worked, and it worked pretty well. It worked so well that PureTech spun the compound out into a company called Karuna, and then Karuna raised funds independently by investors, again venture capitalists. And eventually, as the compound showed that it worked in phase 3, Karuna, the company, was bought by Bristol Myers for about $12 billion. That is probably our biggest success, but meaningful one, because people came up with, the PureTech folks came up with important, and the first new medicine for schizophrenia in 3 decades or so. So it's a great example of what we've done. I've talked about Vedanta, the microbiome company. We also formed a company called Achille, which developed video game technology to treat ADHD and cognition issues. So, and PureTech now has just spun out another company called Seaport Pharmaceuticals that is private at this stage, but developing various treatments for other CNS diseases. So it's a small operation, but an amazing track record over the years. And I should give a shout out to the founder, Daphne Zohar, who literally started this company probably about 18 years ago or so in a small office in Brighton, Massachusetts, I think, just outside of Boston, with Ben Shapiro and a couple of other people who were industry heads who had retired from places like Merck or whatever. And it's done remarkably well. So it's a lot of fun to be a part of, and to see the success that these people have had.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it sounds to me um, like they're not only working on groundbreaking things, but they're also helping to bolster the industry as a whole, by creating these additional companies, and spinning them out.
Uh,
So that, I mean, that's a great
it-
great attribute as well.
Very much so. So it's been terrific to be a part of all this.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're also an author, and tell me a little bit about what you write about, and what are some of the things that you're looking to aim to address.
So when the last few years at Pfizer, the reputation of the industry was getting battered, and there was a lot of, I thought, misinformation out there. And so the first thing I did when I left Pfizer, literally in the first year, was to write a book called Drug Truths, dispelling the bad image of pharmaceutical R&D. And what was rewarding about that was I wrote about all sorts of things. The industry is. I'll give one example. People say, "Well, the industry is only interested in Me Too drugs. They don't do anything original," which wasn't true. And each chapter I addressed one of these things, but then I would tell the story of a drug that showed the innovation of the industry. So with that one, nothing original. I talked about an AIDS drug that we came up with at Pfizer called Cell Sentry, which is a pretty important AIDS drug at the time. Uh, but I also talked about a Me Too drug is such a misnomer. So, you and I, Don, look so somewhat alike. I mean, white middle-aged males or whatever. But I can guarantee you that there are drugs that I can take with no problem that may have an adverse effect on you, and that's true for any drug. Every
Sure.
every drug has certain effects, and a drug like Lipitor, which is now in a generic form, is the third most prescribed drug in the United States as a torvastatin. I know people who take it and get headaches or get GI distress or whatever. So you need to have multiple agents in the category. Even though you might have one successful one, there are other compounds. That compound might not work for other people. So that's one reason. Second reason for having other alternatives is pricing. If you have multiple agents in a certain therapeutic class, the price will always come down because insurance companies will bid you down to say, well, if you want this on our formulary, you've got to come down in price. So that kind of research is very important. And the other thing is, nobody sets out to come up with a Me Too drug after the fact. So it's sort of like you don't sit around and say, well, Merck just had this great compound. Why don't we get ourselves one? Because Merck is selling $1 billion a year with it. Well, if you start a program that late, you'll never. By the time you get in the market, there'll be generic entries, so it won't be successful at all. What happens normally is that people will uh, start programs. We read the same literature, we go to the same scientific meetings. Ideas will foment and grow into programs, and some people are more successful more rapidly, and others are not. So anyway, Drug Truths was set out to do that. Now, that got me a lot of places to give lectures and to talk about this. And invariably now what will happen is people will say to me, I never knew that. I never heard that. So that was rewarding, but it's sort of not big audiences. So then I got an invitation, however, to be on the Dr. Oz show. And I got to go on to talk about the drug industry. And there was a person who was a person who tends to attack and write negative things about the industry named Dr. John Abramson. He was on the panel. It was he and I and Dr. Oz. And I was too naive to ask what the segment was going to be called. And I walked onto the stage, and there was a big sign saying, 4 secrets drug companies don't want you to know.
Oh,
And that was quite the experience. But I got to see, and the audience was also somewhat loaded negatively, so that at one point, Dr. Oz stood in front of a group of 30 people and said, "Wow, how many of you have ever experienced drug side effects?" And they all stood up,
of
everyone.
course. Yeah, of course.
Like, oh, you got to be kidding. But that led me to write my second book, Devalued and Distrusted: Can the Pharmaceutical Industry Restore Its Broken Image? And then I also at the time was writing. I had a blog, and it was picked up by Forbes.com, so I wrote there. And then, as in the last 6 or 7 years, the negativism toward the industry has focused more on drug pricing.
Mm.
And so that led me to write Pharma and Profits, Balancing Innovation, Medicine, and Drug Prices. Because, and that's actually one of my major concerns still, the pressure on drug pricing. And unfortunately, people don't necessarily understand all the issues involved in drug pricing. And you can only, if you only hear the negative stuff, if you only hear Bernie Sanders taking people to Canada to get their insulin, people say this is a disaster and needs to be corrected. And by the way, the Inflation Reduction Act put a cap on insulin prices for everybody at $35, which is wonderful. And I think it's great. Having said that, before the IRA, 75% of the people in this country were already paying less than $35 for their insulin because they had decent insurance, and it was naturally covered. People also don't realize that you can go, and I didn't believe this when I first heard it. You can go to Walmart and without a prescription buy insulin for $24.88 a vial.
Mm.
And you're looking at me like I'm crazy, but it turns out that's true. And so, but you can't. First of all, it's not the very good insulin that is now sold. I'm going on too much on insulin, but I'll say it. The insulin is not insulin. I'm sounding like Rudy Giuliani. Truth isn't truth. Insulin that was discovered in the 20s and 30s is insulin that was isolated from animals. The so-called insulin now are modified insulins that the drug companies, and you need a prescription to get these, drug companies have gone in and made modifications to improve our nation. It's much better than regular insulin, safer to take, et cetera. So people shouldn't go to Walmart to get their insulin unless they're under doctor's prescription, doctor's care, because if you misdose, misinject your insulin, you can have all sorts of problems. But in any case, all sorts of things like this are out there, and as a result, there's tremendous pressure on the industry and pricing, and it's a bipartisan issue. Both Democrats and Republicans will say we've got to rein these drug companies in and get these ridiculous high prices down. And I thought this would all change after the pandemic. That the only industry that could have saved us from the pandemic is the biopharmaceutical industry, with companies like Pfizer and Moderna. But not only them, dozens of companies, if not 100 companies, were all looking at ways to treat COVID as a top priority. And some things worked, like things like Paxlovid and antibodies like Regeneron did. So some things came out very well, but the whole industry did. And there's no other, you couldn't do that in academic institutions. You couldn't do that at the NIH. Only the industry did that. And for a while, I'd say 9 months to a year, Gallup polls and other polls show a dramatic improvement in how the industry was viewed by people. Some of the highest numbers ever seen. And now it's eroded back down and it's coming back. So why do I write? I try and give talks. And why do I have the pleasure of speaking to people like you? Is basically to try and teach what the industry does, what's important, and how it's a necessary part of our whole health ecosystem.
Yeah, I feel like it's a little duplicitous to say that, hey, drug prices are too high, and then we have, our regulators and the the people that are politicians with their hand in their pocket, to reaching deeply into the coffers of the drug prices themselves. And so, I think it's a little disingenuous just to keep saying that, hey, look, the drug prices are too high, and then you accept $100,000 to $300,000 of money from everybody from pharmaceutical warehousing all the way through to the each of the lobbyists that are essentially involved in drug development as well. So I sort of I agree with you. I think it's it's something that the public is just not aware of, all of the different hands that touch a drug, as it goes through. But also, I kind of look at the other side of this, which is, look, it takes decades to research and then bring a drug to market. Back to your original point, and I really think that it's one of those things that you have to work through. So yeah, it looks like we actually just lost John. Hopefully he'll join us back here in just a second. But Yeah, I do think that it's one of those things that unfortunately, we struggle with. So I see you dropped and then came back. So
I'm right back, but let me make one other point,
yeah,
and that
sure.
is there's a natural built-in price control, and that's drugs going generic. So after you've been on the market for about a dozen years, suddenly the price drops down, and so I talked about Lipitor earlier. The generic form is atorvastatin. I'm a atorvastatin user, and it costs literally pennies a day for a life-saving drug that reduces heart attacks and strokes, as all statins do. And that doesn't happen in any other part of the healthcare system. Let's use hip replacements as an example. Hip replacement technology is the same now as it was 40 years ago. And yet a hip replacement will cost $40,000. And that's in the United States. It's about a quarter of that in Europe. And hip replacements, though, don't go generic. The prices for hip replacements will go up 5 to 8% every year, such that in the next 10 years, hip replacement will cost $65,000. That doesn't happen with drugs. Drugs could drop right down. And so there's already a cost containment built into all of this that people don't appreciate.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm gonna switch gears again a little bit. So, given all of your experience and having served on multiple boards, what trends and innovations are you most excited about in life sciences?
Boy, I'll focus on oncology. I think it's something that touches everybody's life in one way or another, friends, relatives, or even themselves. What I have seen in the last period of time is wonderful. We haven't cured cancer yet, but there isn't a cure for cancer per se, because cancer's a bunch of very different diseases with different drivers, and even something like breast cancer. But all cancers are different. But the work that's gone on in understanding what drives cancers, what genetic defects occur. You can take a tumor and do a biopsy now and understand what the driving force for that tumor is. And now, in some cases, you can go right off the shelf for a drug that already exists that could treat that cancer. The breakthroughs in immuno-oncology are unbelievable. People ask, why doesn't the immune system attack cancers and tumors? And it turns out, and Merck and others have figured this out, and now there are some great drugs and more coming that unleash the immune system to treat these tumors, which I think are wonderful. There are a new type of cancer drugs called ADCs, which help guide to help reduce toxicity of cancer drugs by having the combination of the drug with another linker take it right to the tumor, so you're not exposing a healthy tissue to that. So that type of science is just unbelievable, and it's great to see. There's great hope for AI. It remains to be seen how that will translate to drug R&D. A Nobel Prize in chemistry yesterday was awarded to great scientists who now can determine the shape of all proteins and the three-dimensional structure, which enables all sorts of science to occur, including trying to design inhibitors or of those proteins, et cetera. All of them. It used to take a year for a scientific lab to come up with one such protein structure. Now you got the whole library thing. So, so much is going on, Don. So much is happening. I'd like to think that my grandkids will have much longer lives based on all of this happening. But again, I'm going to repeat myself for the millionth time, and that is, it's the biopharmaceutical industry that will capitalize on these and come up with the new medications to treat these diseases. And that's the beauty of that work.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with your statement. I just would like to maybe add a slight caveat. So, um, we're seeing some of the greatest challenges, I feel like, right now in the venture capital markets, in terms of people wanting to invest in the next generation of drugs. And so whenever you talk about licensing a compound from Eli Lilly is one thing, but a lot of these smaller biotechs, like PureTech and others, are the ones who essentially do a lot of this initial work, because oftentimes it's not attractive to the larger pharmaceutical companies until the drug is more developed or more investigated, and I do feel like that starvation of the smaller companies right now is going to lead a bit to a vacuum. Would love to hear your thoughts, if you're seeing the same thing, or if are not.
So investment in biotech tends to have a bit of an ebb and flow. We had a bit of a ebb in like 2010, 2012, around there or so, and then an explosion in the 20 teens, which led to all sorts of new startups occurring. Anybody with an idea that's a reasonable idea seeks to get funding. A lot of times it comes to professors who decide they want to start their own company, or things of that nature. Or scientists may get together and start their own thing. Depending on a venture capital, and a venture capital syndicate could invest, say, 40, 50, maybe even $100 million into this idea. And that money can go a long way in the early stages. Interestingly, discovery research is relatively cheap. It's when you get into clinical studies that you really start driving up the cost, and how you got to make bulk, and you got to get research sites, hospital sites to do. So that becomes more expensive. But having said that, it's been a little bit tougher recently to get funds, but that seems to be loosening recently, and a lot more startups seem to be getting funded. And to be honest, there are startups forming almost on a daily basis in the biotech, mostly in the United States, but also globally. But having said that, a lot of these companies have one great idea, and the idea doesn't pan out, and then they close, they shut her up, and then the scientists will move on to another company, and hopefully repeat the process. So, but that the startup area is a very important part of the drug discovery development ecosystem. But what people, one more point to make in this, people don't appreciate the fact that even a big company like Pfizer, many years ago, while it had, and I'm talking about the 90s, half of Pfizer products came from outside of Pfizer's own research labs. If you think about it, pretty arrogant to think that your own research labs can do everything and cover everything and be the smartest in everything. So you're often dependent upon, in fact, we would have a portion of our budget built, the R&D budget built into bringing things from the outside in to supplement our own ideas, but also to help drive a big company like Pfizer. And the same thing is true of Merck and Lilly and all of these companies to be successful. So important part of the ecosystem, as we said earlier, some fringe ideas or very early ideas, as the microbiome, will get started in a smaller startup company, but eventually get embraced by big pharma and help to benefit the whole world.
Absolutely. So when you look at kind of the field of drug discovery and development throughout your career, what do you consider as your most significant contribution?
Oh boy, I've heard some R&D heads personally take credit for all sorts of things. Look, this is a team effort. I was fortunate enough to help lead the team, a big team in those days. We must have had about 12,000 people globally in all of R&D. I'm pleased with Pfizer came up with during my tenure of drugs to treat neuroscience diseases, cancer, AIDS, smoking cessation. That's all terrific. I'm glad I didn't get in the way of anybody trying to do this, and I hope I was able to give guidance to helping people be successful and provide the necessary resourcing along the way. But you talk about teams, boy. We would after a drug got approved, we would try and take a picture of everybody who was involved, and we'd have to go on the roof of the research building, which we had a couple of hundred people outside the labs, and we take that picture because it's an unbelievable, and people make contributions all along the way. It's not just the guy who came up with a woman who came up with the idea of a certain type of drug be useful to treat a certain disease. It's who formulates the drug so that it can get in, who comes up with the breakthrough in synthesizing the drug so we can make it in bulk, who comes up with the clever clinical trial and a new creative clinical trial that will show the drug is efficacious. So it's an unbelievable group of people that I was really proud to be associated with.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what do you believe are the key factors in fostering a culture of innovation in life sciences?
Boy, if you can bottle that, you can make a hell of a lot of money. I think you try and hire great scientists. You try and give them enough freedom to pursue their ideas within a certain context. So, I once had a fellow come to me and say, you know what, if you can cut my salary in half and let me work on anything I want, I'd be happy. I said, that's not our culture. Our organization, Pfizer Inc., is depending on us to come up with new products and products that they feel that they could make enough of a commercial return in order to keep this whole enterprise of, at the time, 100,000 people running, as well as benefiting mankind. So having great people, give them a certain degree of freedom within the context of what you're trying to do, and try to provide as much guidance as possible along the way. Now, projects don't run forever, and so one of the challenges I had was, how long do you give a program? If sometimes you're in something for 3 years, and the team hasn't come up with a compound yet to test the hypothesis. You sort of like, well, how much more do we do? If it still looks like a viable target, and they still have some good ideas, maybe a little bit longer. But at some point, you pull the plug, and that's a hard thing for anybody to do, and that's a hard stuff. But nevertheless, provide the resources, provide the opportunity, have really smart people, get them interacting. I think were keys in our organization.
Yeah, I can remember from some of the organizations that I was in, we would have these big R&D projects where we spent, millions or tens of millions of dollars, trying to drag something over the finish line. And the answer from the team was always, we're close, we're close. But then, you have to eventually look at something and just say, okay, look, this thing's not going to it's not going to make it, at least not here. And so, sorry, but it is
Yeah,
time to end the project, which is a tough answer I feel like, for any leader to deliver.
absolutely.
And I would say in my career, I mean, for big projects like that, where there's a lot of spend, I probably only saw a handful of them. Right. So
Yeah,
not very many.
yeah.
Uh, yeah,
It still hurts.
yeah, yeah, for sure. So, John, what inspires you?
Oh boy, I would say the dedication that people will bring to their work. Uh, During the pandemic, as an example, I was no longer at Pfizer, but obviously I still live in the Pfizer community here in Southeast Connecticut, and I did have occasion to visit the research labs they now have in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And I was shocked to learn that when the pandemic broke, they closed the labs for about 2 weeks, and then they went back to work in the lab. So they 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 went literally shift work so that there weren't a lot of people in the labs at the same time. Now, obviously, they wore all masks and protective gear. They set up plexiglass shields at laboratory benches so that people would be working and not exposing others. But they knew the importance of what they were doing and went back to work immediately to try and solve the challenges for coming up with both mRNA vaccine and also Paxlovid, which eventually became important as well. And that's just the pandemic example. But there's, people dedicated, work hard. It's not unusual to go by research labs late at night and there's somebody there working up an experiment, a key experiment that they're doing because they know they want to get it tested in their animal model, or running animal tests knowing that this could be a really important compound. And people take this mission really, really seriously, and it's hard and it's frustrating. When 1 in 10 compounds end up that you put into development come out the other side, I mean, you have to deal with a lot of failure along the way. And these people are resilient. They get back on the horse and they go back to work. They're terrific, and their work isn't really appreciated, unfortunately, either. But they're wonderful. So that always inspired me.
Absolutely. What concerns you?
Oh, what we talked about earlier, the lack of appreciation of what the biopharmaceutical industry does, the lack of appreciation for the importance of the biopharmaceutical industry, not just to the economy, but to the health of people along the way. We're on the verge of breakthroughs seem to be occurring all the time, but boy, the more downward pressure on funding of research will kill us. So people don't appreciate this. The biopharmaceutical industry invests 25% of top line revenues, not profits, top line revenues into R&D. So as pressure is being put on, both parties are very excited that you now have the Inflation Reduction Act, which is now negotiating drug prices. And I get it. 80 some odd percent of the country wanted those kind of guidelines, so that's happening. But they don't realize that as a result, the industry is going to be making tens of billions of dollars less, and that's tens of billions. That's billions less going into R&D, and that's unfortunate. And but that's the reality that we now live. So that concerns me.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing that. Last question: what excites you?
Oh, stage of my life now, I see all these things about research going on and extending one's lifetime. I don't think that's going to happen, and certainly not in the near future. I like seeing the success of biopharma R&D. I enjoy being part of it in my small role with the biotech companies I'm working with. I like seeing the breakthroughs being made. And nice to know that for 45 years, I've been sort of on a part of all of this. So that's kind of nice to see. And I hope to continue with companies for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, absolutely. An exciting future for sure. Well, thank you, John, for coming on the Life Science Success podcast and for telling us all about Pure Tech Health and also so many great touch points in terms of your overall career and experience. So thanks a lot for being here and thank you for sharing.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.